What if I told you that the most infuriating public argument of my life didn't end in lasting animosity, but in an impromptu honeymoon booking and a wedding 2 months later? It sounds like the plot of a saccharine romantic comedy, doesn't it? But trust me, this story is anything but a fairy tale. And it happened to me, Serafina Croft, a woman whose life had always been meticulously planned, right down to the color-coded labels on my luggage. I am the protagonist, and I never, in my wildest imaginings, anticipated that a furious exchange over baggage protocol would lead to a lifetime of shared adventures. My journey, typically a linear path, took an exhilarating, utterly unforeseen detour that began at an airport check-in. The air in the airport check-in line was thick, with the collective sigh of hundreds of stressed travelers, a heavy blanket of impatience that pressed down on us all. My meticulously packed carry-on, a feat of organizational genius containing everything I needed for a crucial business presentation in Kyoto, felt like a lead weight as the line inched forward at a snail's pace. I, Serafina Croft, am not by nature a woman prone to public displays of frustration, but the clock on my phone was ticking like a time bomb, and the gate for my international flight was already flashing, "Final call." That's when he appeared, a whirlwind of brightly colored scarves and what looked suspiciously like an oversized, overstuffed duffel bag, attempting to cut in front of me with the serene entitlement of a king surveying his subjects. "Excuse me," I began, my voice a carefully modulated blade. "The end of the line is back there." He turned, a flash of fiery red hair framing a face that was, I grudgingly admitted, strikingly handsome, even when contorted into an expression of mild annoyance. His eyes, the color of warm honey, narrowed slightly, and a smile that barely reached them played on his lips. "Darling," he purred, his voice a low, melodic hum that nonetheless had an underlying current of steel. "I'm about to miss my flight. Surely you can make an exception for a fellow traveler in distress." His tone was dismissive, as though my meticulously planned schedule and very real urgency were merely inconvenient trifles in the grand scheme of his personal drama. My internal alarm bells began to clang like a church bell gone rogue. "Distress," I countered, my own voice now edged with a surprising sharpness, "does not grant one diplomatic immunity from queuing. We are all under similar pressures, and the rules apply equally to everyone." His honey-colored eyes sparked, a silent challenge, and he took an infuriatingly slow breath, as if savoring the impending confrontation. "Rules," he scoffed, "are often made for those who lack the imagination to circumvent them." This was not just a mere line cutter. This was an ideologue of inconvenience, a champion of chaos. I felt my carefully constructed composure begin to fray at the edges, unraveling like a cheap sweater. "And some," I shot back, abandoning all pretense of polite civility, "find their imagination best served by respecting the common courtesy that allows society to function." Our exchange escalated. A verbal tennis match played out amidst the rumbling of baggage conveyors and the hurried announcements overhead. His arguments were as flamboyant as his attire, mine as rigorously logical as a mathematical proof. We argued over the definition of urgency, the social contract of queuing, and the existential dread of missing a flight. The check-in attendant, a young man whose face looked as though he had seen 1,000 such skirmishes, simply stared straight ahead, a silent referee in our impromptu gladiatorial contest. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to deflate my entire being, I, Serafina Croft, made it to the counter, checking my bag with a flourish that silently declared victory. I hurried through security, my adrenaline still pumping like a faulty oil pump, convinced I had just navigated the most frustrating hurdle of my business trip. That conviction lasted precisely until I boarded my flight to Kyoto. I found my seat, 17A, by the window, a small victory in itself. As I settled in, reaching for my noise-canceling headphones, a familiar scent, something floral and exotic, wafted over me. Then, a voice, dripping with theatrical exasperation, filled the space next to me. "Well, isn't this simply divine?" I froze, slowly turning my head, my eyes tracing the vibrant folds of a familiar scarf. There he was, the king of baggage line anarchy, attempting to cram his ridiculously oversized duffel bag into the overhead compartment, his red hair a fiery halo against the sterile white of the cabin. His seat was 17B. The universe, it seemed, possessed a rather wicked sense of humor. Our eyes met, a spark of mutual recognition, followed by a shared, incredulous silence that hung in the air like a poorly deflated balloon. The flight attendant, oblivious to the simmering tension, offered us both a tray of lukewarm nuts and a watery beverage, his cheerful demeanor utterly lost on our stunned faces. "Of course," I finally muttered, my voice a low growl. This would happen. I simply stared out the window, a tiny vein throbbing in my temple. 18 hours. 18 hours trapped next to the human embodiment of my pet peeves. This was less a business trip and more a carefully choreographed descent into personal purgatory. My carefully planned life had officially hit a snag, a rather large, red-headed snag who smelled faintly of jasmine and mischief. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, a cruel, cosmic joke played at my expense. I clutched my noise-canceling headphones like a talisman, prepared for the longest flight of my existence. Utterly oblivious to the fact that the universe had just cleared the deck for an entirely different kind of journey. The first few hours of the flight passed in a tense, uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the drone of the engines and the occasional rustle of my seatmate, who seemed to possess an endless supply of snacks and an equally endless capacity for discreetly hogging the armrest. I, Serafina Croft, meanwhile, was buried in my presentation slides, my focus a fragile shield against his proximity, my brain working overtime to ignore the faint scent of jasmine and the occasional glimpse of his fiery red hair out of the corner of my eye. My logical mind was screaming, "This is a professional trip. Maintain decorum. Do not engage the agent of chaos." But then, about 4 hours in, the universe decided to intervene again, this time in the form of turbulence so violent it felt as though the plane was performing an impromptu tango with a giant. Drinks sloshed, nervous gasps rippled through the cabin, and I, despite my best efforts to project an aura of unflappable calm, found myself gripping the armrest with the tenacity of a barnacle on a ship. Suddenly, a warm, surprisingly firm hand covered mine. I looked over, startled, to see his honey-colored eyes, now wide with a hint of genuine concern, fixed on me. "Breathe," he instructed, his voice, usually laced with that playful sarcasm, now soft and steady. "It's just a little bumpy. We'll be fine." The touch was unexpected, utterly disarming, and for a fleeting moment, the tension in the cabin and in my own rigid posture seemed to ease. When the turbulence subsided, he released my hand, a faint flush creeping up his neck, as if embarrassed by his moment of genuine human connection. "Still think rules are optional during an emergency?" I quipped, a ghost of a smile touching my lips despite myself. He actually laughed, a rich, melodic sound that was entirely devoid of sarcasm. "Even I," he admitted, "have a healthy respect for the laws of physics." That broke the dam. We started talking, tentatively at first, skirting around our initial, fiery confrontation, then slowly, carefully, opening up. His name was Austin, a name as vibrant and unpredictable as he was. He was an independent travel writer, constantly chasing the next compelling story, which explained the oversized duffel bag and his rather cavalier attitude towards airline regulations. He was en route to explore the ancient temples of Kyoto, a journey fueled by a passionate curiosity and a healthy disregard for itineraries. I, Serafina Croft, in turn, found myself revealing details about my life I rarely shared. The meticulous planning, the demanding career and corporate strategy, the quiet satisfaction I found in order. He listened intently, his head tilted, those honey-colored eyes absorbing every word, occasionally interjecting with a surprisingly insightful question or a witty, irreverent observation that made me laugh despite myself. He was a hurricane of vibrant energy, challenging my assumptions, poking holes in my rigid worldview, and yet, somehow, making me feel more alive than I had in years. The hours flew by, no longer an arduous journey, but a fascinating expedition into the mind of a man who was, in every conceivable way, my exact opposite. We talked about our families, his parents, eccentric artists who believed in following inspiration wherever it led, my own, a collection of academics and professionals whose lives were structured like perfectly balanced equations. We discovered a shared love for obscure independent films, a surprising agreement on the superiority of dark chocolate, and a mutual disdain for overly sweet coffee. It was as if the universe, having initially orchestrated our collision, was now meticulously arranging the pieces of our personalities, finding unexpected points of congruence amidst our stark differences. As the plane began its descent, the sprawling lights of Kyoto appearing like scattered jewels below, a strange sense of melancholy settled over me. This unexpected, exhilarating conversation was coming to an end. "So," Austin said, turning to me, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Kyoto, huh? You're here for work, I assume?" I nodded, a small sigh escaping my lips. "A presentation. All very formal, very structured. And I'm here for adventure," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the approaching city, "to get lost in ancient beauty, to let serendipity be my guide." He paused, then turned back to me, his smile now utterly devoid of artifice, brimming with a warmth that completely disarmed me. "What if," he began, his voice a low, compelling whisper, "serendipity guides us somewhere else entirely, after Kyoto?" My breath hitched. The question hung in the air, audacious and utterly alluring. It was a proposition that flew in the face of every carefully constructed plan, every logical inclination I possessed. It was a leap of faith into the unknown, a dive headfirst into the very chaos I had always meticulously avoided. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine invitation there, the thrilling promise of a life less ordinary, something shifted inside me. The rigid walls I had built around my heart, the fortifications of logic and routine, began to crumble like ancient ruins. "Where exactly," I asked, my voice a little breathless, "would serendipity guide us?" His smile widened, a brilliant, dazzling thing that made my heart pound like a drum solo. "Anywhere," he whispered, "as long as we go together." By the time we landed, the cabin lights flickering on, the mundane sounds of seatbelts unbuckling filling the air. We hadn't just made plans for coffee in Kyoto. We had, in a flurry of shared travel apps and whispered suggestions, booked a 2-week trip to a tiny, sun-drenched island off the coast of Italy, a place neither of us had ever heard of until that very moment. It was impulsive, illogical, and utterly gloriously insane. 2 months later, in a small civil ceremony attended by our wonderfully bewildered families, I, Serafina Croft, married Austin. My life, once a perfectly ordered spreadsheet, was now a vibrant, unpredictable tapestry woven with laughter, adventure, and the exhilarating chaos of a love I never saw coming. The man who had once driven me to the brink of airport-induced madness was now my greatest adventure, my most beloved paradox. And I, Serafina Croft, the protagonist who had always expected predictable outcomes, finally understood that the most beautiful journeys are often the ones you never planned.